almost got the wrong one. Here we go.
Why have I quit my job? Why have I, bought a van? And why am I going to drive around the country? Well, I'm passionate about the idea that you need to be heard. And I want to stitch these stories together across the states. We're going to find the commonalities. And it's going to be really an amazing experience. And I look forward to you joining me on the jar.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Mental Health Today. I'm your host, Ken Stearns, and another beautiful day here. I'm, super grateful hanging out in Portland with a good friend of mine from grade school. So you count those 50-year relationships on one hand, probably for most of us, and just a lovely day. Got this morning, kind of checking my schedule, and interesting. Look on there, and I get to talk to a marijuana person. A marijuana person. And so very excited because as somebody who enjoyed marijuana from a pretty young age, and I've had a pretty healthy relationship with it, I think, over time, but, indoctrinated in those, like I said, I was an end of boomer, beginning of the X gen. So I grew up in that little sleepy little suburb and, just kind of learned the ways back in the day and managed to maintain, I think, a pretty healthy relationship. And so I'm kind of excited, Amanda, to hear a little bit more about your work. Founder of Personal Plants.
Correct.
So really curious to get more into that and find out what that's all about and what you're doing. As I mentioned in our pre-chat, I saw you online with a post yesterday on LinkedIn and talking to a nurse or a doctor.
A nurse, yeah.
And talking to her a little bit about is vaping safe? And I did just see an article about that, talking about the stuff that they have. I think California just had I don't know if you saw that, but California had a little expose. That they went in there and they tested some of the resins that you're smoking and I guess in some of the vapes. And apparently not always clean. Not that anything we're eating or smoking is clean anyway.
I was going to say, I think there's an allowable level of like bug parts, but bug parts won't hurt you. They're good for you.
Theoretically, yeah. Until they're not. They're not. But I'm with you. Protein's good, right?
Yes.
So Amanda, tell us about yourself. What are you doing over at Personal Plants? How do you end up with a passion like this?
It's definitely a right place, right time kind of situation. A lot of times I say that I feel like I was in the garage when the computer was being built, right? There were just like a handful of us. Yeah. And I grew up in the Midwest during the DARE times. I'm a Gen Xer, as we discussed.
Oh, I love it.
Very much in the Just Say No, Nancy Reagan, red ribbon, hoopla. And after I got my master's degree in social work in Chicago, and decided to come out to California to get a PhD in social welfare. And what was really driving me was my knowledge of the social justice implications of the drug war. That was really what drove me.
Really?
The racial disparities and arrests, the collateral sanctions associated with having a drug charge on your record. So I came out to Berkeley to study this, and that was in 2002. And kind of unbeknownst to me, wandered into this medical cannabis revolution that was happening in this very unique part of the country. And, coming from Chicago, where cannabis was still very criminalized, there was no open consumption anywhere, to the Bay Area, where you could walk into a store and purchase cannabis. I mean, it was really an unbelievable shift in the social fabric. And so I figured, you know what, I'm getting my PhD. I have access to this phenomenon. I'm going to study it. So I ended up doing my doctoral dissertation on medical cannabis dispensaries. And that was in 2005, 2006.
Wow.
And there were just a handful of us at that time that were studying this. I mean, it really was not at all what it is today. I could probably count the cannabis researchers on two hands, maybe one hand. So I had an opportunity to really get into this field on the ground floor. And over the past 20 years have been working in the realm of social science on cannabis use. And that's really what led me to found Personal Plants, because growing up in the DARE generation, we were not allowed to understand or to learn the realities of substance use. We were taught, just say no, just don't do it. Cannabis is a gateway drug. It's the most dangerous thing you can do. And the reality is that now that we have access in most states to some kind of cannabis commerce and cannabis marketplace, it's important that individuals have a better understanding about how to form positive, healthy, balanced relationships with cannabis. Because as a society, we really suck at moderation. Like, we're terrible at it.
We are all in.
And marketing, like, they know that, and they hit those dopamine receptors, and they get us to, have FOMO, and they do everything they need to do to get us to consume things. And cannabis has been around for thousands of years, but if we don't learn how to have a healthy, balanced relationship with it, we're going to waste this opportunity to move it out of the criminal justice system, because we're not going to be able to have that respectful, healthy relationship.
God, so true. Crazy thing too is, you mentioned earlier the socioeconomic, not the socioeconomic, but the justice part of this, and just our prisons must be littered with people in on the dumbest cannabis crimes. You got to air quote that, because it's like holding a bag of weed on a street corner.
Absolutely. Oh,
and
absolutely.
There's probably somebody in jail for that still.
There is.
From a 1990s sentence.
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, cannabis prohibition was a very effective and efficient tool for social control, because it smells, right? It's very obvious when someone's consuming cannabis. So for a long time, the law enforcement officers used the smell of cannabis as an excuse to search, to detain people that they did not view as having as many rights as other people. And this is not new. I mean, the very first drug laws in the country were in San Francisco against opium smoking as a response to Chinese immigration into California in the early 1900s, late 1800s, right? So since the beginning, the idea was, if we want to control a certain group of people, but we can't just pass a law allowing us to control that group of people, let's find the substance that they use the most. Let's make that illegal. And then we can go in and we can search them and detain them and do all of those things. So the cannabis laws were a play out of a playbook, but it was not a playbook that they invented. It was a very old playbook. And we're just now getting to the point with cannabis where we're starting to right those wrongs and to acknowledge what prohibition was used for all along.
It's pretty heavy stuff, right? I mean, like, if literally they pass these laws, and I mean, there's also the drug companies somewhere behind there making money, because maybe cannabis was getting in the way of something. Is there any, is it a double edged or a double, like two really good reasons to do it?
I mean, people like to point their fingers at Big Pharma, and I'm not going to sing the praises of Big Pharma. We could do a whole other show on Big Pharma and talking about marketing and capitalism and mental health and all of that. But I do not think Big Pharma had a vested interest overtly in keeping cannabis illegal. They don't need cannabis or not need cannabis. They're making plenty of money on the drugs that they're putting out there. And, the fact that the Schedule I nature of cannabis made it all but impossible to get it approved by the FDA as a medication really kept it at bay for the pharmaceutical world. Now, we're now considering the rescheduling of cannabis to Schedule III, and that does change the conversation about pharmaceutical involvement, because that does bring an FDA pathway for cannabis that did not exist before.
What drugs are in line? Do you know what kind of stuff happens now? Because I think I saw a Twitter post or something from President Biden, that said, going to Schedule 1 to Schedule 3. It's long time coming, blah, blah, blah. So it'll be a beautiful post saying he's going to try to get it to a level 3, Schedule 3.
Yeah.
What happens after that? Because that's got to be there's got to be.
That's a great question, Ken.
A lot of crazy stuff happens after that.
Well, I mean, the truth is that we don't really know yet, because even if it is moved to Schedule 3, which there's still a long process that has to happen before that can happen, then we kind of have to see what are the implications. So some of the implications that have been bantered around, one is that there is this tax law, 280E, that prevents cannabis businesses from taking business deductions because the law does not allow businesses that deal in Schedule 1 or 2 drugs to take business deductions. And the goal of it is really as like an anti-money laundering kind of corruption. But what it does is I could be a state legal cannabis business and I cannot deduct a lot of business expenses that regular businesses can. So there is a suggestion that if cannabis were Schedule 3, then 280E would not apply and these businesses would be able to take these deductions, but they're still dealing in a federally illegal substance. So the question still stands, would you be able to deduct business expenses if you're selling a federally illegal substance? So we don't really know, but that's kind of on the table. On the medical side, as I mentioned, the Schedule 1 nature of cannabis says in its definition that cannabis has no accepted medical value. And the process for even studying a Schedule 1 drug is so difficult that most researchers don't even want to go down that road. It takes decades in order to get approval. So because of that, there's been very little what we call gold standard medical research done on cannabis, which is the randomized controlled clinical trial. These are the kinds of studies that are needed to get FDA approval for a new medication. So there's a thought that if cannabis were Schedule 3, not only does it admit that there is medical value to cannabis, but it might improve the process for studying cannabis. It might make more grant money available. It might make more universities interested in this. It might make more drug companies interested in this. There's still a lot of issues with the FDA process, which is a whole other show. But it could open up opportunities for the development of cannabinoid-based medications. So that's kind of another thing it could do. Other than that, it really won't do much. Cannabis will still be illegal on the federal level. You still have no interstate commerce. It doesn't compel states to pass legalization laws. It doesn't change the criminal penalties in various states for cannabis possession or sales. It doesn't change the federal penalties. So we're really looking at a business opportunity, maybe on the tax side, and a medical development research opportunity on the medical side.
Two questions and kind of in one, opposite sides of the coin. Got to make sure I can frame this the right way. Biggest misconception. How about just we'll stick with the biggest misconception of marijuana users, if your surveys and the research you've done, and then biggest misconception of non-marijuana users or non-cannabis. Maybe get my language right.
Yeah. So I think the biggest misconception about people who use cannabis or marijuana is that they are lazy, unmotivated. We still kind of go back to that. Sitting on the couch in your mom's basement, playing video games and eating Cheetos. It used to be thought that the idea of being a cannabis consumer and being a healthy, active, responsible, high-functioning, highly successful person, that those were mutually exclusive things.
Yes.
They are not. Right. Cannabis consumers run the gamut in terms of age and occupation and life status and physical activity and diet. They are both sides of the political aisle. So there really isn't a cannabis consumer as a stereotype. Now, we could point the finger at Hollywood because when we look at a lot of the characters in the 1970s and 80s and 90s, in movies who used cannabis, they were a certain type, right? Cheech and Chong and Jeff Spicoli and the dude.
Fast Times at Ridgemont High, right? I mean, that's all you need. Yeah.
And Matthew McConaughey and Dazed and Confused.
That's right.
You had all of these characters who were these kind of inflated stereotypes of cannabis consumers. And they were always, that was their whole character, right? Like their whole character trait was smoking weed. And so one of the things we've started to see now is that using cannabis is being done by characters in TV shows and movies that is not their whole personality, just like a character having a glass of wine with dinner.
It's a drink, right.
we're starting to see that shift, which is really good. And I think that that reflects the reality of the fact that cannabis consumers are everybody. They're not a certain type of person. So I think that's the biggest misconception about cannabis consumers. I think the biggest misconception about non-consumers is that they're all just completely against it. I mean, the truth is that yes, there's a small percentage of non-consumers who are like, cannabis is terrible and no one should use it. But most of them don't care. It's just not for them, but they're not going to pass judgment on other people for using it. So I think there's this idea that it's either you're way pro cannabis or you're way anti-cannabis, when the truth is most people just don't care.
Don't care. Most of us are always in the middle on most things.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. So most people who use it are like, yeah, I use it. No big deal. Most people that don't are like, yeah, I don't use it. No big deal. And then on the fringes, you have your like really, evangelical cannabis consumers and your really evangelical non-consumers. But, if we're looking at this scientifically and everything's a bell curve, these folks are on the tail ends of the bell curve. And most of the people, whether they use it or not in the middle, are just like, eh.
Yeah, it doesn't define me. It doesn't define me. It's just something. Yeah.
Exactly.
I love that. Is a funniest edible story.
Oh, okay. So I have,
because I mean, there's so many memes. I mean, we could take a break and just have some fun for a minute, because the memes are like, my favorite is these edibles ain't blank.
Right.
And 15 minutes later, it's a dangerous thing. I mean, it's fun. It's funny to make fun of it, but it's also quite serious. I mean, people get themselves into bad spaces.
So before I tell you my edible story, I will tell you that it's better now than it was under Prohibition, because when I was first in the medical cannabis market in California 20 years ago, and there were no rules. So you would go into a dispensary and it looked like a bake sale. It was just like random baked goods wrapped in cellophane.
Yes.
You were getting dosing instructions like eat a thumbnail's worth. I mean, there was no knowing how strong anything was. And so you really were taking your chances. Nowadays, they have these nice gummies that are 10 milligrams of THC per gummy.
Exactly.
That. It's way more predictable, way better, in my opinion. But my edible story has to do with one of those pre-legalization edibles that was basically just a cookie wrapped in cellophane. So in 2008, I had the fortune to go to DC and be in Obama's inaugural parade. Cool. And I was twirling a flag in it. And I had never twirled a flag before, but it was an opportunity I wasn't going to pass up. So I was like, I'll learn how to twirl a flag to be in the parade. Sure. So I went to DC and I was so nervous about messing up that I didn't consume any cannabis for like a week while I was there. Cause I was just like, I'm going to mess. I'm going to drop the flag. Yeah. The National Guard had already told us, if anyone drops a flag during the parade, we're going to come get you out of the parade, because that's like a security risk, because we don't know if you dropped it on purpose, if you're going to reach for something. So anyway, I was just terrified. So I get through it. I don't drop the flag. Everything's great. It's an amazing experience. I get to the airport to go home, and I had brought an edible with me. And I was always had a huge high tolerance. Like I could eat edibles, never have a problem. But I had been not using anything for a week.
And 1 week? Yeah.
I had all this adrenaline like let down after the parade. So like my body chemicals were all crazy. Yes. So I eat this cookie in the airport and I get way too high. Like, I don't know if you've seen the movie Final Destination, where like everything's like a clue that like some catastrophic accident's going to happen. Okay. I started seeing that all around me. I was like, that kid's standing too close to that thing over there. That light just went out. What does that mean? And I'm like talking myself into this panic. And I'm like, I need to get on an airplane. And I am like freaking out in the airport. So I was like, all right, Amanda, you're going to be fine. You've done this a million times before.
You're a professional, Amanda. Get yourself together.
Exactly. Get your shit together, lady. And get on the plane. And I told myself, once I got on the plane and sat in my seat and saw that it was all just a normal airplane, then I would be fine. And that's what happened. But that is really the only time I have had an experience with an edible where I was like, this is too much.
Now,
my tolerance these days is way, way lower than it was back then.
yes.
So I'm much more careful now. But yeah, that's the time that I overdosed myself on edibles and almost didn't get on the airplane.
The funny part is even professionals, right?
It happens.
It happens. Yeah, my good friend of mine. I was taking my brother to Asia. He was traveling with me to Asia, and I was living there, and so I'd been in California for a break and was heading back and dragging my older brother with me. And my good friend, a good friend from California, gave us 2 of these Rice Krispie treats. He's like, "Hey, I was by the store," and this is back in the day when they were like brand new, just opened up, and I can still remember licking what looked like the resin or whatever off the cellophane in the bathroom as we were smashing these. And apparently, we're probably, I think, to break these into 4, and then have them. But we each ate 1. My brother didn't do so well. It's pretty funny. Anyway, those are, but it's never serious in the end. It's always in your mind, and it is not really. But can it induce psychosis? I mean, can this, like, are there people really being badly affected or hurt by the concentrations we're seing now? What's the real downside of the concentrations? I mean, they're making great weed, and it's beautiful and it's powerful, but it's not what I grew up with. It's a lot stronger.
It is. So let me say this. Very strong weed has always existed. That has always been a thing, but it wasn't.
It's like that to me is almost a myth. So that's true.
It has always existed, but it wasn't out in the general population.
Yes.
Right. So like it has existed. It's these landrace strains that have been around for a very long time, but it wasn't like what someone was bringing to your party.
Yes.
You know what I mean? So the access that the general public has to very strong cultivars of cannabis has definitely increased. And even though we've always had hash, right? So hash is extremely old. Like it's a very, very old way of creating cannabis. It was used in a way where it was mixed with flour and it was a very small amount. And so the way that we're consuming these concentrated oils has also changed because we've developed technology through vape pens to ingest them directly without any kind of flour as a mediator. So all of that being said, does cannabis cause psychosis? I think it's a very complicated question. I will say that for people who have a history of psychosis, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, of serious mental health conditions, you or a family member has a history of this, you should take great care before ingesting any psychoactive substance.
Literally any psychoactive substance.
Anything that's going to work with the chemistry of your brain. If you or a family member have a condition where the chemistry of your brain may not be functioning the same way as everybody else's, anything that's going to mess with that chemistry or interrupt that chemistry should be taken with a lot of care. Now, that being said, there are people with major anxiety disorders, depressive disorders, personality disorders that find cannabis to be helpple.
I was just gonna go down this line of questioning.
So yes, and that's what makes it so kind of difficult because for someone with the same disorder, for one person, it could really be helpful and really calm their symptoms. For another person, it could exacerbate their symptoms. But when we look at pretty much every medicine, that is the case, right? So, I'm allergic to penicillin.
Actually, it's a great point.
You might take penicillin and penicillin does great for you. And you're like this, but me, it's going to make me break out in hives and have a horrible rash. So anytime there's a chance that the substance you're taking could in fact exacerbate your symptoms, you have to be very, very careful. Now, the thing is that the percentage of the population that this applies to is very, very, very small. Very few people have schizophrenia or have bipolar disorder or have psychotic related disorders. So we're talking about a population that's very, very small. Do we see people who are otherwise healthy with no history of mental health issues, no family history of mental health issues, suddenly become psychotic because they use cannabis? No.
I haven't seen that story in the news.
No, but do we see people who have already...
Yeah.
Right. Right. So, yeah. So I think it's important for people to be careful, especially if you have a history of mental health conditions. Now, one thing I will say, because you mentioned these kind of high concentrated oils,
Yeah.
the answer to that is we don't know. Because even though cannabis has been used for thousands of years and hash has been around for a very long time, we're still in our infancy of people having regular access to highly concentrated oils that are being inhaled through a vape pen. And this goes back to that episode I did that you mentioned on is
Yes.
vaping safe? If you are somebody that's using a 85, 90% THC cannabis oil several times a day, we do not know what's going to happen to you. We know that you will not suffer a fatal overdose because you can't fatally overdose on THC, but we do not know what the long-term impacts are to our endocannabinoid system, to our receptors. If people are consuming very high levels of
Yes.
THC without the other things in the plant that add to the protection, like CBD and other cannabinoids and terpenes, they're just isolating out the THC. So it's kind of like the
Yes.
difference between orange juice and eating an orange. Both will cause your blood sugar to go up because there's sugar in that fruit. But orange juice is going to do it in a much bigger way than eating an orange. And we've been a society that has consumed our cannabis like eating an orange. And now everyone's drinking the juice. And we don't quite know yet what's going to happen, to be honest. You know?
That's real. It's a good point. We don't know, and we like you said before, we don't have the studies because they take a long time, and there's no real money in it, and it's illegal.
Right. So maybe 20 years from now, we'll start to see some longitudinal studies of people that have been using highly concentrated cannabis oils regularly for long periods of time, but they haven't been around long enough. I remember when the first vape pens came out. And that was like late 2000, like 2009, 2008, 2009.
Wow, 10, 12, 12, 13, 15 years. 15 years though.
So, but they haven't been out en masse to the public for very long.
Oh, that's a good point. They were in California and
they were in a
few markets. And also you haven't seen these concentrates that you can edibly eat or smoke or whatever. Like you said, these super 90%, 100%. Those are very new. These concentrates are quite new.
They're getting better with the technology. And, again, we go back to capitalism. If there is a group of people out there that say, hey, if you make this for me, I'll pay for it. There's a company out there that's going to make it.
Yes.
And that's why I have personal plans, because I want to teach people how to self-regulate and how to have healthy relationships with cannabis. So even when capitalism rears its ugly head and says, buy this, it's going to make you feel really good, people have enough self-awareness to think about what are the risks, what are the benefits, what's my intention here, and to be more mindful about it.
Yeah, it's a great chance to bring us back to your business and the site. What can people find there? When they go there, how can they? I mean, I saw some cool stuff. You got a few things for sale, which are pretty cool. Some of the oils, the merch. I also saw all the interviews, which look great. You got some of those up. What are you trying to, when someone comes, what's a hope for you on that?
Well, there's really, there's three different things you can do there, right? So you can learn. So I post a new article every other week. It, covers health and safety and cannabis use. It covers the industry and the science and policy and what's happening. And I always am trying to make this a very translatable and digestible content for the average person.
Okay.
So that they can get information. Everything's backed by science. Everything is a public health framework. So you can go and read those articles. You can subscribe to the newsletter. You'll get them in your inbox every other week. And then I also have recipes on there. So I believe that one of the best ways to develop a healthy relationship with cannabis is to make your own cannabis products. So I encourage people to grow their own cannabis if there's somewhere where that's allowed, to make their own tinctures and topicals, to make their own edibles. I think it's a really great way to kind of be intentional and mindful, just like making your own food versus ordering takeout, right?
So good.
So there's a ton of recipes on there. And then we have all of our episodes of The Truth About the Plant, which is our YouTube web series, 15-minute episodes. We answer questions like, can you overdose on marijuana? Is THC addictive? Is smoking cannabis safe? We just did the one on vaping. So we really try to address very common questions about cannabis. But if you were to Google it, you'd get like 1,000 different responses, and many of them would contradict each other. So we're trying to be a source of truth, but make it really easy for people to get the information that they need in an actionable way. So that's what you can find on the website. And it's mypersonalplants.com. And then I also recently launched a pilot program called Cannabis in Balance. And I write about it a little bit on the website, but it's in pilot right now. It's a 15-week online program aimed at helping people be more mindful and intentional with their cannabis consumption. So, people who maybe find themselves using more than they want to, or maybe they don't want to smoke it anymore, or maybe they want to change their consumption patterns, but they don't really know how to do it. And all the traditional programs out there on drug treatment come at it that cannabis is a negative, bad thing. And I don't believe that. I think it's a wonderful, fabulous thing if used mindfully. So we're in week 5 of that program. I've got about 20 people that are going through that right now.
Great.
But then I hope to get it out there to others and really open it up so that people can, examine these relationships and make sure they're using cannabis in a way that's going to most benefit.
Yeah. I had one of my one of the other podcasts. The podcast I originally started my kind of podcasting life was called The Jar, and I'd interview people in their homes with this set of questions. And one of my guests he started a company called Canna Recovery, and so he went through a lot of drug challenges through his life, and he was saying the hardest part was like, so a lot of the stuff was, and he said it worked for people, but it didn't work for me, which is all or nothing. He's like, I went to the 12-step a few times, and he said, I just couldn't all or nothing. It's not me. And he's like, I don't like alcohol was not, like easy. It was the other stuff, getting rid of it. And he said, I found cannabis to be not a gateway drug, but a way to get off the gateway. It was a bridge off the island of hell. And he said, I used cannabis because he goes, I could be considered an addict, I guess, but he's like, my life is normal. I'm functioning. I'm not a heroin addict. I'm not a speed addict like I was. And he's like, I am a completely much better person. And he said, I believe this is a path for recovery for people. And so he was trying his own 12-step program using cannabis to get off the harder stuff and to find a stable platform to be on that people could maintain and still, be in society.
Yeah, in California, we call that Cali sober.
I've been sober for 12 years.
Yeah. So it's like, people that just use cannabis, but are using cannabis in order to stay away from other substances. I actually did one of the very first studies on this topic in 2008.
Cool.
I did a survey of medical cannabis consumers, and I published it in the Harm Reduction Journal, and found that over 50% of patients said they were using cannabis as a substitute for alcohol. Wow. And 75% said they were using it as a substitute for pharmaceutical drugs.
For pharmaceuticals, that's powerful. Yeah. Like you could get off some of the you get off your SSIs.
You can, and so the thing
weed's got to be better than that.
Well, the thing that's one of the interesting things about cannabis is that a lot of chronic health issues are not just physical. There's a psychological component, and whether that's anxiety or trouble sleeping or depression, when you have a physical illness that is chronic, you a lot of times have mental health symptoms. So people are on a myriad of pharmaceuticals, some to address the physical issues, some to address the mental health issues. And what they find is that cannabis can address both. It has both properties that help with their physical pain. It has properties that help with their mental health issues. And so they're able to either reduce or eliminate the pharmaceutical drugs and replace them with cannabis, because cannabis serves multiple purposes.
It's on both sides.
Yeah.
Huh. Well, maybe maybe Dan is onto something. He doesn't know it. He didn't know it, but he is onto something. What's in the research room for you? What are you working on now? What are you thinking about?
Well, I guess mention this
spending
program.
time on.
Yeah, so
Oh, okay,
I
the
really
program.
want to, yeah. So after I'm done with this 15 weeks, I'm going to talk to the participants and find out what worked for them, what didn't. And then I'd like to open this up to kind of a larger cohort. And the program is based on 3 different therapeutic concepts:
Okay.
mindfulness, harm reduction, and cognitive behavioral therapy. So I'm really curious how the mix of these different theories and platforms impacts some of the issues that people have when they try to reduce or change their cannabis consumption, which are things like cravings for cannabis, not really having negative outcomes associated with their use. So having to more self-regulate versus being
Mm,
regulated by the substance
right,
itself.
right.
So I'm really curious how this can inform a new type of approach to substance use. I mean, I'm a harm reductionist, like through and through. That's
Yes,
really
yes.
my chosen perspective on how we should help people who use substances hazardously. But cannabis is a kind of a unique case, because
Mm,
you do have people that are using it medicinally, who are using it multiple times a day without ever getting intoxicated. And then you have other people that are using it multiple times a day and are not having good outcomes as a result of that.
yes.
And a lot of times these people are lumped into the same category. So there's a lot of nuance that has to be kind of sorted through in order to match people with the right approach to maintaining this good relationship. And so I'm really trying to dive deeper into what that looks like in
Hmm.
terms of a program. And is this something that can be adopted in a conventional treatment setting, instead of sending people who want to change their cannabis consumption to something like NA or an abstinence based program when that's not what they need? When somebody has an issue with
Yes,
unhealthy eating, we don't tell them to stop eating food, right? We say, okay, you're going to eat. So let's figure out the healthiest
the best
way
way.
for
Yeah.
you to eat and reduce any harms associated with eating
Mm.
unhealthy foods. And I feel like that's the approach we need to take with cannabis, and not this, never use it, stay away from it, admit you're an addict and have a disease approach, which I do not think is going to work for the majority of people that use cannabis.
Yeah, and also just because cannabis users are a little bit more, I mean, on average, kind of a little bit more clever, I wanna say sometimes, like, that's not gonna fly with the cannabis crowd, they're gonna see right through
Well
that.
and that's the other thing is that, like
Like,
I
they just
mentioned, they're not having negative outcomes. So,
yeah,
they
yeah.
might feel like they're coughing a bit too much because they're smoking it, or they may say, I'd like to maybe not use it as much as I'm using it, but they're not like a country music song. They're not like, I lost my
Yes.
wife and my dog and my house and my car because I was smoking weed. Like that's not a case that we see. And because of that, like I said, it takes a lot more kind of inside
Mm.
motivation to say, I'm not going to change because I'm having a negative outcome. I'm going to change because I feel like this could be healthier than it is.
Yeah, and I can manage the relationship better and even get a better outcome. Because if they are
Yeah.
feeling like it's helping, I mean, I think for me, it helps at times, right? I've got ADHD, and, some of my best moments are when I'm a little bit, impacted by some cannabis.
Yeah.
It certainly for my create opens up my creative space for me and some hours of focus, a little bit more time in the saddle, if you will.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think that people could get just as much, if not more, benefit with less than they're using now.
Yes. Yeah,
And I
yeah,
think that's kind of the key, right? Is that
yeah.
we use it because it makes us feel good, and we get that reinforcement in our brain that says, this is going to make you feel good, do it again. But that builds tolerance, it builds
Yes.
habit. And so helping people step back and
Mm.
say, you know what, you could have just as good an outcome and get that creativity and get that relaxation and get what you're looking for, and be
Yes.
using a quarter of the amount that you're using now, which is
That's
economical. It's better for your health. So
mm.
that's what I'm trying to help people do, is kind of take that 10,000-foot view and say, right now I'm using it 6 times a day. Could I use 3 and still
Yeah.
get the result that I'm looking for? And if so, why wouldn't I do that?
Yeah, or use it 6, but half as much when or
Exactly.
use it
Exactly.
doesn't matter if you use it 12 times, but it's still the net effect over the day is less.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely.
Interesting. How much fun are you having right now?
I can't believe that this is my career, to be honest. And it's hard because, I mean, nowadays
Pinch me, mommy.
the cannabis
Whoop.
industry is so it's so big and there's so many people working in it, and you forget
Yes.
sometimes how lucky you are, how many people would love to work with this plant. And I, just am afforded the opportunity to do it. And it's all I've ever done. I mean, it's been the only adult job I've ever had.
That is wild to me. That is just wild. What would your mom say?
Oh, she loves it. I mean, I'm very fortunate. I've got parents that are super supportive. Everyone in my family is very much on board. They support legalization. My parents live in Chicago. My dad was very excited to tell me that he's now a VIP at his local dispensary because he's got he's like the frequent buyer program. My brother is a certified ganjier out here in California, which is a cannabis sommelier.
I was going to say, wait a minute, back up. What, a ganjier?
So a ganjier is a program that I was help found. I was on the founding council, 4 or 5 years ago now. And it is, we set it up very similar to a wine sommelier program where there's a training component. There is a testing component, and there's 3 tests that you have to pass. And if you pass, then you become a certified ganjier. And we have ganjiers that work, as buyers for dispensaries. They help farmers with breeding decisions. They work in hospitality. They run their own brands and companies. But it's really this very in-depth education into the history of the plant, the science and chemistry of the plant. My brother is a certified ganjier and lives here in Northern California. And I live in the Emerald Triangle right now, which is in Mendocino County, but I'm actually moving to Washington in a couple weeks.
Why
so I've got that going on.
Why would you do that?
Oh, Ken, you only have to live through a couple fire seasons to be able to answer that
fair enough.
question.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, done.
Very, very clearly.
Yeah.
We were looking for a new climate and cheaper cost of living. Just wanted to something different. I've been in California now for 22 years.
Yeah.
Looking for a change. We both work remotely, so we're free to move wherever we want. And we chose outside of Tacoma on the South Sound. 2 hours from Portland.
Oh, I thought when you said Washington, because your advocacy and the work, I was thinking Washington.
Everyone
DC.
thinks I mean DC. No, the state
and I was like, why would you do that?
No, I would not move to Washington.
Yeah, okay. Wait,
but I would move to the state of Washington.
That makes so much more sense. Okay, totally understand that. The other one had to be some kind of advocacy work or some
No, state of Washington. We're moving
much better.
North.
Lovely.
Yeah.
It's so funny. A good friend of my roommate in college, and really one of my lifelong best friends. And I met him in South Carolina, dragged him to California with me, met his wife there. Great, great guy, great couple, and a couple of cool kids. And the daughter, just, that one they worried about in high school, just worried about her all the time. My friend's a worrier, he's always worried about his daughter, and she's now balling it as like the CMO of a genetics company. And she's out there, they got a partnership in Thailand. They're opening up in Thailand, and she's over there doing her own. I met him at Christmas, and she had about 6 plastic baggies with magic, like old style cannabis containers, the old lunch baggies. And she had names of them, not a name, but it was more like a number. And her job was to taste it and to write down the tasting notes, write down the notes, and basically create a profile for them. And then all the people in the company that were on the tasting panel would do that, and they'd merge them together. So she's, she's right up there with a ganjier. I mean, she's probably already a ganjier in her own world. She could be a gan. She probably could be. She could probably pass the test.
She should come through the program. There's so many great opportunities in the cannabis space, but for anyone out there who's listening, that's like, I want to work in cannabis. That sounds amazing. It is, but it's still a very new industry, and it's still very unstable and very volatile, and it's federally illegal. So a lot of the ways that typical businesses can grow and can scale are not available to the cannabis industry. And so I don't want anyone to like not get into the industry if you love cannabis and this is exciting. And it is exciting. I mean, this is a social change that is huge that we just get to witness by sheer luck during our lifetime, right?
So fun.
So it's an amazing opportunity. But if you are really someone who loves stability and loves knowing exactly what's going to happen in your job and loves being able to predict the future, you might want to wait a little bit, at least until cannabis is different at the federal level. And we have interstate commerce and banking and things that are more akin to a typical industry. Because right now it's still very like flying by the seat of our pants.
It is kind of chaotic.
It's very chaotic.
Might attract some people.
And some people love that. And, you know, people who love startups and love building the plane while they're flying it and love, you know, not knowing what's going to happen tomorrow. I mean, you know, then you're probably going to like the industry. But, you know, it's definitely still, the cement is still wet, as I like to say.
Yeah.
That's good. And so there's a lot of changes that are still happening.
Cannabis. Tell us about the plant. Tell us about this, you know, forget the smokable stuff.
Yeah.
Give us some miracles of the, you know, because I think you know, you've got a heck of a Twitter following. We got quite a few people zooming in on Twitter, just kind of hanging out, listening. You must be a megastar.
I've been on Twitter since like 2012. So over time.
A big shout out to all the Twitter, to all the X. The X people
I can't
joining
do it.
in.
I can't bring myself to do that. But you know, X and LinkedIn are pretty much the only platforms that are cannabis friendly. You know,
great.
So that definitely draws a lot of people from our industry. You can actually say the word on those platforms without getting booted, like on
Facebook
the
or
other
something else,
like Meta platforms. Yeah,
but Metas.
Anyway, so the plant.
Tell us some fun facts about the plant.
The cannabis plant has been used across the world for thousands of years, and it's actually one of, if not the oldest cultivated plant. Meaning that as soon as we grew it, and we were like, wow, this is pretty cool, we picked it up and took it with us wherever we went. And so because of that, cannabis definitely has regions where it's most native to because of the climate in those regions, like Asia and Africa. But it's been moving around the world ever since we were moving around the world. And the reason that you see so many different cultivars and varieties out there is because these were all being grown in different parts of the world. And then people were going and visiting those places and getting those seeds and bringing them back. So, you know, I could go into why sativa and indica is bullshit. But one reason that sativa and indica is bullshit is because those terms refer to the botanical structure of a plant. And plants that were grown in warmer climates presented one way, and plants that were grown in colder climates presented another way. But as soon as we were able to visit those climates and take those plants from one place to another, it all became hybridized. So indica and sativa were very convenient ways, and we didn't have testing, and we didn't have terpene analysis, and we didn't have other ways to talk about how the plant was going to make you feel. People use sativa and indica as kind of indicators about whether it was more uplifting or more relaxing. But it doesn't really mean anything. You're definitely going to know a lot more about the effects of a plant from the cannabinoid profile and the terpene profile than you are from whether it's labeled indica or sativa. So that's just kind of a little, I'll get off my indica sativa soapbox about that.
Real quick though, that my friend's daughter told me that over Christmas, and I was, you know, sat in my car driving back to my apartment or whatever. That's they're crazy. What the heck? These young kids, what do they know? That's bananas.
But there is one degree of truth connected to that, and that has to do with the terpenes. So there are certain terpenes that were found more often in plants that had a sativa botanical structure. And some of those terpenes, like limonene, are associated with an uplifting effect. Other terpenes that were found more in plants that had an indica-related botanical structure, like linalool, are more relaxing. And so there is kind of underneath it, but like to say, oh, this is sativa, it's going to make you uplifted, and this is indica, it's going to make you sleepy, is a broad and hasty generalization based on nomenclature that was useful to us and a time in history.
At the time.
But now, you know, we really want to learn more about the other components of the plant that impact effect. So cannabis is an annual, which means it blooms once and then dies.
Okay.
So it's not one of these evergreens. It's just going to keep flowering every year. After you plant a cannabis plant and it flowers and gets harvested, you have to throw away the stalk and plant a new one the next year. Cannabis has genders. So there's the male plant and there's the female plant. The female plant is what gives you the flowers or the buds. The male plant gives you the pollen. Sensimilla is known as a plant that has not been pollinated, has no seeds. If you want to breed your own cannabis, which I highly recommend you do because it's really fun, then you're going to need to have a male because you're going to have to get that plant sex going so that the male pollinates the female.
I love that.
And
Get
then
the
you're going
plant
to have
sex
those
going.
seeds, right, that you can then plant and make your own cultivar. That's why a lot of commercial growers use clones, because a clone is a carbon copy of the mother plant and is guaranteed to be female.
The same, right? Okay.
But we also have feminized seeds that are guaranteed to be female. So there's all kinds of ways to ensure that you don't have a male in your garden. Cannabis loves heat and dry weather, which is one reason that it grows so well where I live, because it gets very hot here and we have no rain from about May until November. It also likes cold evenings. So chilly temperatures is where the terpenes form and become intense. So if you want something that's got a really intense terpene profile, it likes to have a very hot day and then a cool evening. So where I live, it can get up to 100 degrees during the day, but it's getting into the 50s and 60s at night, which is a huge temperature differentiation. So cannabis likes that. If you're growing cannabis outdoors, you're usually going to harvest around October. It goes with the light cycle. So it's going to grow in its vegetative state up until solstice with the height of the summer. And then once the sunlight starts going away, the days get shorter, it's going to slowly start to flower and really start going towards the end of its life cycle. And then once you harvest it, it's going to die. I love sun-grown cannabis. I'm a huge advocate for cannabis grown outdoors. It's gotten a bad rap over the years, and there was all this assumption that cannabis grown indoors was of a better quality, which is a whole other show about prohibition and media and why that was. But I like my cannabis to be exposed to the elements. It makes it a more complex plant. The plant generates cannabinoids and terpenes in response to stress. And that stress can be the fluctuations in the temperature. It can be being exposed to different things in the ecosystem,
wind, even maybe the
wind. But when you're indoors and you're controlling everything, you may eliminate some of those threats, but the cannabis, in my opinion, is going to be a little bit more one note. So I really like cannabis that's grown outdoors, preferably in a regenerative manner so that it's good for the environment. I happen to live, like I said, in the Emerald Triangle, where we have hundreds of small sun-grown farmers that are really amazing stewards of the land. And personally, I'd rather support them with my dollars when I go to the dispensary, just like I'd rather go to the farmer's market. So just a shout out to all those farmers and the care and craft that they take in producing their cannabis and the cannabis that's grown outside in nature. I really enjoy that.
Amanda, awesome conversation. We could probably just go and go and go. Especially I'll come up with a couple more good, crazy questions and I'll just keep going.
As you can tell, I've got so much information about cannabis in my brain. There's room for little else.
It's all right. We love you for that. Sacrifice. Look at this. Amanda has put her entire brain on the line for all of you.
Exactly.
For
That's
all
the
of
only
us.
thing that's in here is cannabis information.
And how many years now? You said 20.
I first started working in cannabis in 1998 in activism, but my first kind of job in cannabis was in 2005.
Yeah, 26 years advocating or studying it or being a part of that's big. That's really big. Awesome meeting you. Actually, I'm a little even confused how I found you or how you found me.
I think you messaged me on LinkedIn and you were
did.
just like,
I think I must have saw you and I said,
I have a podcast. And I was like, hey, I love being on podcasts, which I do.
I love that. Yeah, I was like, it must have been that. Some people find me and then there are just a few people I'm reaching out and I'm like, oh, you look cool. I would love to hear more from you.
Well, I'm glad we connected. This was super fun.
I am. Any kind of closing thoughts, parting shots, or any kind of messages for your rabid followers?
I will, of course, encourage folks to go to mypersonalplants.com to sign up for our newsletter. I'll encourage you to check out our YouTube channel, which is The Truth About the Plant. Very bingeable, 15-minute episodes covering all kinds of topics. And I'll also say, my email address is amanda@mypersonalplants.com. And I am very open to if you want to reach out. If you're out there and thinking you have questions about your cannabis consumption or someone that you know and you want to be able to talk to them about it, or you want to be able to talk about your own consumption, feel free to reach out. I am a social worker by training, so I love to talk to people. And I'm always willing to help if you have questions about medical cannabis and maybe you or someone you love is looking for some answers around using cannabis as medicine. I'm not a medical doctor, but I can refer you to the right research and the right people. So feel free to reach out. And then the last thing I'll say is that even though a lot of us can go to a store and buy cannabis and not be worried about it, and use it without any threat of legal interference.
Yes.
A lot of our fellow consumers out there are not in that position yet. Yes. And they live in a state where cannabis is still illegal, or they live in a legal state, but they have no access because the communities around them have banned it. The fight for activism is not over. Just because capitalism is slowly eating away at the industry doesn't mean we don't need people to still be out there fighting for decriminalizing the plant, for people not going to jail, for freeing the people who are in jail, for creating an industry that's going to be that recognizes the negative impacts of cannabis prohibition on communities, and not just giving people random licenses, but actually investing in these communities. Like, this is work that still needs to be done. So if you are someone out there that wants to join the industry, this is part of it. You don't get to just sit in an office and talk about weed all day. You have to get involved in the social justice part of it too. You're muted. Oh, maybe you're telling me that. He's gone. All right. Well, until he comes back, there's a big green thing in the middle of my face. But again, I'll give you that website, mypersonalplants.com. You guys can go to the side. Mypersonalplants.com. You can check out The Truth About the Plant on YouTube. You can follow me on social media. If you're interested in cannabis data, you can check out newfrontierdata.com, which is my other life, and learn about that as well. So Ken seems to be coming in and out. So I'm not sure if, there we go.
I think I made it back. Can you hear me now?
All right, I can hear you. That's okay. I was just entertaining people.
Sorry about that, folks. A little technical difficulty. I can't hear myself. I'm going to sign out and then I'll come back. Amanda, hang out for a minute. I'll catch you on the backside.
Okay.
Thank you everybody so much for listening, supporting Mental Health Today. Really appreciate Amanda. And you can reach her at Amanda
at mypersonalplants.com.
Mypersonalplant.com.
Plants.
Okay, I got it right.
Personal plants with an S.
Again, thanks to everybody so much, and love your comments. Really appreciate everybody showing up from Amanda's side of the house. Totally appreciate it. Hang around for 30 seconds. Got a little fun little exit commercial about my other show, and see you soon.
All right.
Yeah, loose, baby.
We're about to go and make this vessel with these great professionals at Public Glass. We're not part of the community, but we're from the outer family of glassblowing. Yeah, we're gonna go make a magical giant jar with optic lenses so that if you turn it, it changes all the time. So if you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change.